hated the summer house. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but it's true. We would stay there for at least a week every year, and sometimes we'd even go up there for holidays. One year we spent Christmas up at the cabin, which was absolutely miserable. The cabin, my family's summer home, sat at the edge of Lake Erie and was a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a loft up in the eaves. It had a little kitchen, a nice living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms downstairs. One for the 2 sisters and one for me. Mom and Dad always slept in the loft, so they never saw any of the weirdness that I saw from my bed in the smaller of the 2 rooms. The floor of the cabin had these wide gaps between the floorboards, and it let you see the underside of the cabin. Dad always promised us that he would replace the floorboards, but he never did. They were old wood, smooth and not prone to splinters. And I guess Dad thought it was worth the occasional spider or bug coming up through the floorboards if his socks didn't get hung on poking wood. Bugs, spiders, and other kind of pests were the least of my concerns. I didn't notice it right away, of course. The first time we stayed there, I was just amazed by the cabin. It was so cool, having a cabin all to ourselves, and I explored every room and every inch before going outside. We swam in the lake, we took our canoes out, I climbed trees and played pretend for hours, and after dinner I fell into a deep sleep. I'm not even sure that I dreamed that first night, and I couldn't wait to do it all again the next day. As that first week went on, however, I started to notice the strange noises that wafted up from beneath the floorboards. It sounded like something moving under there, a scuffling sound that made me think of small animals or bugs. I could sometimes catch glimpses of them between the gaps of the boards, but they were always too quick for me to see. Dad said it was probably just rats, and that a lot of those old cabins had rodents living under the floorboards. He put down traps in the kitchen, not wanting to bother them if they were just living under the house. The traps never caught anything, though, and Dad just kind of shrugs it off as a well-behaved pest. Well, they were well-behaved for everyone but me, it seemed. I never slept like I did the first night again, and that scuffling beneath the floorboards would sometimes keep me awake at night. I would lay there, listening to them moving around, and think to myself that they sounded way too big to be mice. If they were rats, then they were big rats, and I sometimes worried that they would try to come up through the floorboards. We always had fun when we were there, but I spent my nights praying I could get to sleep before the scratching noises could keep me awake. My parents bought the house when I was 4, and we went there every year till I was 12. I had a lot of time to listen and a lot of time to investigate the noise, as well as a lot of time to lie awake and be scared. When I was 10, we stayed there for 2 weeks after a storm knocked the power out of the house. It knocked out the power for the whole area. The flooding caused the grid to go down, and my parents decided to stay there until things returned to normal. It was miserable. Every night, I just lay there listening to the scrabbling of whatever was under there. No matter how many pillows I had on my head, no matter how much I swam and ran and wore myself out, no matter what I did to fall asleep, it never did any good. The scratching and scrabbling would always keep me awake, and after 8 nights straight of this, I had enough. It was about 11 o'clock, and I growled as the scratching started again. I was tired, I was grumpy, and I had had enough. I pushed myself out of bed, coming down hard on the boards before stomping around as loud as I dared, hoping to scare them. I had been stomping about for a couple of minutes when suddenly the noise under my feet stopped. I stood there, feeling pleased with myself as I crawled back into bed. If I had known it would be that easy, I would have done it weeks ago. As I closed my eyes and finally drooped into something like sleep, I felt secure here for the first time since that very first night. But it was short-lived. When I heard the scrabbling again, I realized it had barely been an hour. The sound was so loud it made me think that something was trying to come through the floor. I peeked over the side of the bed and saw something pressing between the cracks. It was dark, so it was hard to tell. But through the floor cracks, I thought I saw fingers digging up and through the holes in the wood. The fingers were dirty, the wood making them run with dark liquid as it cut them, but it kept pushing. I was frozen in fear, my 10-year-old mind not sure what to do, but as the floorboards groaned, I knew it would get me if I didn't do something. I reached beside my bed with a shaky hand and found the baseball bat that I had leaned there. I had been practicing. Baseball tryouts would start soon, but this was not what I imagined I'd be using it for. I took it up, leaned down, and swung at the hand with all my might. It didn't stop right away, but after a few more hard shots, it pulled its fingers back under the boards. They were probably broken. At least I hoped they were. And as I clutched the bat, I waited for them to come back. I sat there for a while, staring at the floor as I watched something worse than a finger looking back at me. It was a single bloodshot eye, and it looked very human. It locked eyes with me, and I pulled back into the bed, the bat clattering to the floor. My parents came quick when I started screaming. I tried to explain it to them. I tried to tell them what I had seen, but they just thought I was having a nightmare. Finally, they allowed me to sleep with them in the loft, and until we went home, that was where I slept. I refused to be alone in that room, even during the day, and I wasn't bothered again that time. It wasn't the last time I saw that mad eye, though, or heard the scrabbling of all those fingers. We didn't go back for the next year. Dad couldn't get the time off approved or something. When they planned a week-long trip when I was 12, I tried to get out of it. I still had nightmares sometimes about those eyes and fingers, and I did not want to go back. I was 12, old enough to be by myself, and if my sister hadn't tried to do the same, then I think I'd have managed it. I even promised her she could have my room, but she was not going for it. Mom put her foot down and said none of us were staying home, and we would all be going, and we would all like it. I packed my bat, as well as a flashlight, and we set out for the lake house in the second week of July. I tried my best to wear myself out that first day. I swam for hours. I explored and hiked, and by the time night fell, I was nodding off at the dinner table. I had run myself ragged, and I was hoping that if I didn't antagonize them, maybe they would leave me alone. By the time it was late enough to head to bed, I fell onto the little mattress and was out before my head fully hit the pillow. I thought I had managed it. I thought I had finally gotten to sleep before the scratching could start. And as I slipped off, I thought I might have finally broken the cycle. When the scratching woke me in the wee hours, I cursed and smacked my pillow as I sat up. It was louder than ever. It sounded like animal claws, like nails on a chalkboard. As I peeked over from the edge of the bed, I could see something as it moved beneath the boards. It was pushing again, thrusting its fingers between the wooden slates. And when the fingertips began coming through, I felt like I was having the nightmares all over again. It pushed at the boards, warping them and bending them, and I felt certain that it would come through the floor at any moment. Some of the fingers were bent in odd ways, the tips looking like they might have healed after being broken. As I took up the bat again, I prepared to give them something to heal from again. I smashed those fingers as they tried to poke free, and as the blood ran down, they pulled them back in as the eye came back to stare at me. It was bloodshot and awful. And when I hit the floorboards, it moved away, and I was left in silence. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, every scrape of a tree branch, and every groan of the wood sounded like the scraping returning. I finally fell asleep, but it was nearly morning, and I woke up tired and groggy. I was pokey the rest of the day. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, but I assured her I was fine. I did take a nap later, though. I wanted to be on my game when I came back that night, but I got more than I bargained for. As I sat in the middle of my bed, bat in hand and fighting sleep, I began to hear a scrabble like I had never heard before. It was as if a beast with 1,000 fingers was crawling down there, and as it moved, it dug its nails deep. The boards began to buck and bulge, a multitude of fingers scrabbling at the wood, and when they began to poke through, there was no way I could get them all. I swung my bat again and again, smashing fingers and breaking nails, but it was like an army was beneath the floorboard. I kept hitting them again and again, their digits snapping loudly, but the wood was starting to come up. I screamed, and not for anyone, but just in general. And as they started to press up and into the room, I caught a glimpse of what was beneath. I wanted to scream, but it was stuck in my throat. I thought it was rats at first, and then I thought it was just a single person. But as I saw the eyes looking up from the floor, I didn't know what to think. It was people, naked and skeletally thin, all of them trying to come up and out of the area beneath the floor. I counted 4, then 5, then maybe half a dozen, and as they tried to pry up more boards, their numbers kept growing. How many were under the floor? I pictured ants coming up out of a hill, and the idea of that many half-starved humans pressed beneath our summer cabin made my skin crawl. I heard loud footsteps coming toward my room, and suddenly the door opened and the hall light spilled in. I thought there might be as many as a dozen. They looked up as I did, their eyes looking surprised as they saw him. I was shocked too, but my shock was twinged hope as someone came to save me at long last. "What in the hell are you?" But Dad stopped as he saw what was there under the floor. They saw him too. They tried to get through the floor, but he didn't give them time. He stepped in, grabbed me, and stepped out, closing the door and putting a chair under it from the hallway. Then he woke up my sisters, took all of us up to the loft and called the police. Then he sat up there with a pistol, something I didn't know he owned until that moment, and waited for the police to arrive or some of the people from the floor to come out. When the police arrived, he came down to let them in, and then he came back to keep us safe. That was my dad, always a protector. The cops didn't find anything, but the pushed-up boards kind of helped their story. I told them how long it had been going on, what I had heard and seen. They searched under the house and in the nearby woods before finally giving up. They found sign under the house of something moving around down there. Even a screen on the backside of the house that had been jammed open, but they didn't find much else. Dad didn't tell me till I was older, but apparently the sheriff who came out to check the scene told him his story. The lake house was so cheap enough that working stiffs like my parents could afford it because it was the site of something terrible. The last owners had gone missing suddenly, a man, a woman, and 3 children, and none of them had ever been found again. They had searched everywhere but found neither hide nor hair of them. The only thing they did find was pushed up boards in the room I now stayed in, enough boards for a small horde to squeeze in through. My parents sold the lake house after that. We got a timeshare in North Carolina. That was a decade ago, but I still have nightmares about the people under the cabin sometimes. If you see a cabin for sale in Lake Erie, be very cautious and do your homework. There could be more in the foundation than just termites.